when a decorated canine officer refused his handler's commands at a funeral, breaking protocol in front of the entire precinct. Everyone assumed grief had broken the animal's training. But what the dog knew and what he was desperately trying to tell them would unravel everything they believed about the case. Welcome to our channel. Here, you'll discover surprising stories that spark your curiosity and move your heart. Make sure to subscribe for more high-quality content just like this. And now, let's get into the video. The snow fell in thick, silent curtains outside St. Michael's Cathedral that Christmas Eve morning, each flake a tiny ghost descending on a town that had already buried too much sorrow. Inside, the pews creaked under the weight of 200 bodies pressed together, cops in dress blues, sitting shoulder to shoulder with grieving civilians, their breath forming clouds in the underheated sanctuary. At the front, beneath a crown of white lilies and crimson poinsettias, rested a coffin far too small for the grief it contained. Detective Sarah Chen stood in the back corner, her fingers wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She'd been awake for 37 hours straight, and her eyes burned with exhaustion and something sharper guilt that chewed at her insides like broken glass. The little girl in that coffin deserved better. They all did. Chun. The voice belonged to Captain Marcus Webb, a mountain of a man whose presence commanded silence even in whisper. Hex is here. Brennan's bringing him in through the side entrance. Sarah nodded, her throat too tight for words. Officer Jake Brenner appeared in the arched doorway, and beside him, moving with the fluid precision of a born warrior, was Rex. 90 pounds of German Shepherd, black and tan coat gleaming even in the dim light. Ears alert despite the solemn occasion, Rex had been 7-year-old Emma Hartley's shadow for the last 2 years of her impossibly short life. The girl's father, Officer David Hartley, had brought Rex home as a puppy back when Emma was still healthy, back when her laughter could fill their small house like sunlight through windows. Even after Emma's diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Rex had remained constant. The dog had slept beside her hospital bed during chemo treatments, had let her tiny fingers grip his fur when the pain became unbearable, had somehow known to be gentle when her immune system was compromised and her skin bruised at the slightest touch. David Hartley sat in the front pew now, his shoulders bent like a man carrying the weight of mountains. His wife, Michelle, pressed against his side, her face hidden behind the black veil. They'd buried their only child 3 days before Christmas. What no one in that church knew what Sarah Chen had spent 37 sleepless hours confirming was that Emma Hartley had died from cancer. She'd been murdered. Rex moved down the center aisle with Brennan's hand light on his lead. The congregation watched in silence, understanding that this was more than ceremony. K-29 officers were family. They grieved. They mourned. The department psychologist even suggested that bringing Rex to the service might help him process the loss of his small companion. But as Rex approached the coffin, something changed. His gait shifted. His ears went flat, and a low, almost inaudible whine escaped his throat. Brennan felt the lead go taut in his hand as Rex pulled forward, not with aggression but with desperate urgency. "Easy, boy," Brennan murmured. "Easy." Rex didn't listen. The dog reached the coffin and planted himself there, front paws braced against the polished wood, nose working overtime as he sniffed along the sealed edge. His whine grew louder, Marty insistent. Then he did something that made every cop in the room straighten in their seats. Rex began to bark. Not the alert bark he used on drug busts, not the warning bark that preceded an attack. This was something primal, something desperate, a sound that raised the hair on the back of Sarah Chun's neck and sent ice water through her veins. "Brennan, control your animal," Captain Webb hissed, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Brennan tried. God knows he tried. He gave the heel command, the down command, the quiet command that Rex had obeyed thousands of times before. The dog ignored every single one, his entire focus locked on that coffin like it held the secrets of the universe, or the truth about how Emma Hartley really died. Sarah Chen was already moving down the aisle, her exhaustion forgotten, her detective's instincts screaming that Rex knew something they didn't. Around her, the whispers started, confused, uncomfortable, angry. David Hartley had risen from his pew, his face twisted with anguish. "Get that dog away from my daughter." His voice cracked like breaking ice. But Rex wouldn't move. He pressed his body against the coffin, paws scrabbling for purchase, and the sound that came from him was almost human in its desperation. Sarah had worked with canine units for years, and she'd never seen anything like this. Because Rex wasn't grieving, Rex was trying to tell them something. And in that moment, surrounded by 200 witnesses and the ghost of a little girl who deserved justice, Sarah Chen made a decision that would either save her career or end it. She pulled out her phone and dialed the medical examiner's office, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is Detective Chen. I need you to halt the burial and reopen the Emma Hartley case. We have probable cause for exhumation." The church erupted. David Hartley lunged forward, held back by 3 officers. Michelle Hartley's wail of anguish pierced the air like a siren. Captain Webb was shouting orders, trying to restore order, but Sarah couldn't hear him over the pounding of her own heart, because Rex had finally gone silent, sitting perfectly still beside the coffin, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah with an intelligence that transcended species. And in that silence, heavy as snow, heavy as truth, heavy as the weight of a child's stolen life. Everyone in St. Michael's Cathedral understood that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. What had really happened to Emma Hartley? And why was a trained police dog willing to destroy his career, his handler's trust, and the sanctity of a funeral to make sure someone finally listened? The answers were buried with a 7-year-old girl, but not for long. Sarah Chen had seen death in every form during her 12 years in homicide. Bodies pulled from rivers, victims of domestic violence, gang shootings that painted entire city blocks red. But she'd never seen anything quite like the horror show that unfolded in the medical examiner's office 6 hours after Rex's disruption at the funeral. Dr. Patricia Okafor stood over Emma Hartley's small body, her gloved hands steady despite the storm raging outside and the even fiercer storm of controversy surrounding this examination. Demi was a woman who'd performed over 2,000 autopsies in her career, but even she looked shaken as she reviewed the preliminary findings. "You were right to push for this, Chen," Dr. Okafor said quietly. The original death certificate listed cause of death as cardiac arrest, secondary to acute leukemia, with complications from pneumonia, standard enough for a child in her condition. But Sarah's voice was sandpaper rough. "But someone didn't want us looking too closely." Dr. Okafor pulled up a series of images on her computer screen. Microscopic views of tissue samples that meant nothing to Sarah's untrained eye, but clearly meant everything to the doctor. There are trace amounts of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent used in surgical procedures. In the right hands, administered properly, it was a medical tool. In the wrong hands, it was the perfect murder weapon, fast-acting, difficult to detect, and in a child already gravely ill, nearly impossible to distinguish from natural causes. Someone injected her. Sarah felt the room tilt slightly into her IV port, Dr. Okafor confirmed, zooming in on enhanced photos of Emma's small arm. There's unusual bruising around the injection site, inconsistent with standard medical procedures. The succinylcholine paralyzed her respiratory system. She suffocated, while fully conscious, unable to call for help, unable to fight back. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. How long would it have taken? 3 to 5 minutes. Dr. Okafor's voice softened with something that might have been rage or might have been grief, probably both. She would have been aware, terrified, and completely helpless. The image of Emma Hartley's last moments played behind Sarah's eyes like a nightmare film reel. A 7-year-old girl, already so brave in the face of cancer, trapped in her own failing body, while someone who had access to her hospital room, her medications, her trust, murdered her slowly. How did the first autopsy miss this? Sarah demanded, because no one was looking for it. The original examination was cursory. A sick child dies in the hospital. Parents don't request full toxicology. There is no apparent sign of foul play. The attending physician signed off on natural causes, and that was that. Dr. Okafor removed her gloves with sharp, angry movements. But your dog knew better. Rex, the German Shepherd, had been trained for narcotics detection, but his nose could identify hundreds of distinct chemical compounds. Succinylcholine had a faint, sweet smell, bitter, almonds. Some described it, that could linger on skin, on clothing, even on the embalming fluids that had preserved Emma's body for burial. Rex had smelled murder, and he'd refused to let it be buried. I need everything, Sarah said, her mind already racing through protocols, evidence chains, potential suspects, full toxicology panel, every medical record from Emma's last hospitalization, visitor logs, staff schedules, security footage. Everything. You'll have it! Dr. Okafor met her eyes, and Sarah saw reflected there the same burning need for justice that kept her awake at night. Someone killed that child and thought they'd get away with it. Make sure they don't. The snow was falling harder when Sarah emerged from the medical examiner's building, fat flakes that stuck to her hair and melted against her feverish skin. Her phone buzzed with 17 missed calls. Captain Webb, David Hartley's attorney, the department press liaison, half the precinct demanding to know what the hell was going on. She ignored all of them and dialed Officer Jake Brennan instead. June. His voice was wary. Where's Rex? At the kennel. Captain wanted him away from the family until this shitstorm settles. Sarah, what's happening? People are saying you've accused the Hartleys of... I haven't accused anyone of anything yet, Sarah cut him off. But Emma was murdered. Jake. Poisoned. And Rex knew it. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah thought the call had dropped. Then Brennan spoke, his voice hollow. Jesus Christ. I need to see Rex. Now. Can you meet me? Yeah. I can do that. Another pause. Sarah, you know what this means, right? Someone had access to that hospital room. Someone who knew medications, who could move around without suspicion, who Emma would have trusted enough to let close. Sarah did know. And the list of people who fit that profile was terrifyingly short. Every single one of them had been at the funeral. Every single one of them had watched Rex's desperate attempt to reveal the truth. And one of them was a killer who just realized their perfect crime was unraveling. The Riverside Canine Facility was a low-slung building on the edge of town, surrounded by training grounds and exercise yards, now blanketed in white. Sarah pulled into the parking lot 20 minutes later, her Honda's tires crunching through 6 inches of fresh powder. Brennan was waiting by the entrance, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "He's been quiet since we brought him back," Brennan said as they walked inside. "Too quiet, like he knows he did something big, and waiting to see if anyone understood." The kennel was warm and filled with the familiar sounds of dogs barking, paws on concrete, the rattle of chain link. Rex was in the last run, lying with his head on his paws, his dark eyes following their approach. When he saw Sarah, his tail thumped once. Twice, a question. "Hey, boy." Sarah knelt outside the cage, and Brennan opened it so Rex could approach. The dog came to her immediately, pressing his solid weight against her legs, his tail wagging harder now. She buried her fingers in his thick fur, feeling the warmth of him, the realness. "You tried to tell us, didn't you? You knew something was wrong." Rex licked her hand, then sat perfectly still, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her chest tight. He was waiting for her to understand, to act, to make things right. "Can Rex track a specific scent from the coffin, Sarah?" asked Brennan. "If he smelled the succinylcholine at the funeral, can he identify it again?" Brennan's expression shifted from grief to grim determination. "If anyone can, he can." "But Sarah, you're talking about bringing a canine into a murder investigation based on scent evidence alone. Defense attorneys will tear that apart. Then we use Rex to point us in the right direction and build a case the old-fashioned way." Sarah stood, her mind clicking through possibilities. "I need you to trust me, Jake. And I need Rex to trust me too. We both do." Brennan clipped a lead to Rex's collar and handed it to Sarah. "Where do we start?" "The hospital." Sarah checked her watch. 5:23 p.m. on Christmas Eve, which meant most of the day shift would have gone home, but the evening crew would be starting rounds. Emma spent her last 3 days in the pediatric oncology ward. Whoever did this had intimate knowledge of her condition, her medication schedule, and when she'd be alone. The drive across town was tense and silent, except for the sound of Rex panting softly in the back seat. Sarah's mind churned through everything she knew about the case, which felt simultaneously like too much and nowhere near enough. Emma Hartley had been diagnosed with leukemia at age 5. She'd undergone 2 years of chemotherapy, had achieved remission once, had relapsed 6 months ago. Her most recent hospitalization had lasted 11 days, and she died on December 21st at 2:47 a.m. David Hartley had been with her. He'd held her hand as she slipped away, or so he'd told everyone. Michelle Hartley had been home with the flu, too sick to visit. The attending physician was Dr. Raymond Garrett, a pediatric oncologist with 20 years' experience and a reputation for being brilliant but emotionally distant. The nursing staff included 4 regulars who'd cared for Emma throughout her treatment. Any one of them could have done it. All of them had motive, means, an opportunity, or seemed to. But motive was the question that kept Sarah awake at night. Why would someone murder a dying child? What could possibly be gained from ending a life that was already measured in weeks or months rather than years? Money. Emma's family wasn't wealthy. Insurance fraud. There were easier targets, mercy. Then why use a method that caused terror and suffering instead of a peaceful overdose? No, this wasn't mercy. This was murder. Cold and calculated and brutal. And Sarah Chen was going to prove it. St. Mary's Hospital rose against the night sky like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows glowing yellow in the darkness, each one a small sun fighting back against winter's grip. Sarah bodged her way through security with Brennan and Rex in tow, ignoring the curious stares from the overnight staff. The ride to the 6th floor felt endless, the numbers climbing with excruciating slowness while Rex sat perfectly still, his ears pricked forward, sensing they were close to something important. The pediatric oncology ward was quieter than Sarah expected for a Tuesday evening. Just the soft beep of monitors, the whisper of ventilation systems, the muted voices of nurses at their station. Christmas decorations hung everywhere, cheerful reds and greens that felt out of place in a place where children came to fight for their lives. "Can I help you?" The nurse who approached was young, maybe with tired eyes and a name tag that read Jenny Martinez, RN. She looked at Rex with obvious confusion. "We don't allow dogs on this floor unless they're registered therapy animals." Detective Sarah Chen, Riverside PD. Sarah showed her badge. "This is Officer Brennan and K9 Rex. We need to see Emma Hartley's room." Confusion in Jenny's eyes turned to something darker. Recognition, then fear. Emma's room. But she... "I heard about the funeral. About what happened. Is it true? Are they saying someone... "We need to see the room," Sarah repeated, her voice leaving no space for argument. "Which one was it?" Jenny swallowed hard and pointed down the corridor. 6, but it's been cleaned and reassigned. We have another patient in there now. A boy with lymphoma. You can't just... Yes, we can. Sarah was already moving, following the room numbers printed on the walls. Brennan fell into step beside her, Rex's lead held loosely in his hand. The dog's behavior had shifted the moment they'd entered the ward, his nose working overtime, body tense with focus, every line of him showing that he was tracking something. Room 614 was halfway down the hall on the right, its door partially open. Through the gap, Sarah could see a child sleeping, maybe 9 years old, small and fragile, beneath white sheets. Machines beeped steadily at his bedside. A woman sat in the chair beside him, her head tilted back, caught in the uncomfortable sleep of someone who'd spent too many nights in hospitals. "We can't go in there," Brennan whispered. "Not with a patient." "We're not going in." Sarah turned to study the hallway instead, her mind reconstructing the scene from 3 nights ago. Rex, track. She gave the dog his head, letting him move freely while keeping the lead loose. Rex didn't go to the door. Instead, he moved along the wall, nose pressed to the baseboard, to the door frame, to a small supply alcove tucked between rooms. His body language changed. Tail rigid, ears forward, a low whine building in his throat. "He's got something," Brennan murmured. "Jenny!" Sarah called the nurse over, keeping her voice low. "This alcove here? What's stored inside?" "Medical supplies. Mostly bandages, gloves, saline bags. Nothing controlled. Nothing that requires special access. Staff use it all the time for routine supplies." Jenny was wringing her hands, her earlier resistance crumbling into anxiety. "Why? What does the dog smell?" What Rex smelled was death. Sarah could see it in every line of his body, the way he pressed against the alcove door, pawing at the base, desperate to get inside. She pulled on latex gloves and opened the door slowly. The space was narrow and deep, shelves packed with exactly what Jenny had described: boxers of bandages, 4 bags hanging from hooks, containers of alcohol prep pads. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. But Rex was going crazy, his whine rising to a near bark before Brennan gave him a quiet command. Sarah stepped inside, using her phone's flashlight to examine every surface. The shelves were dusty in places, fingerprints visible on the metal edges where hands had reached for supplies. She photographed everything, documenting the scene even though she had no warrant, no official standing to be here at all. This was beyond off-book. This was career-ending territory. But Emma Harter deserved better than official channels and departmental politics. On the bottom shelf, pushed to the very back behind a stack of disposable bed pads, Sarah's light caught something that made her heart skip. A small glass vial, empty, lying on its side. She lifted it carefully, angling it to read the label in the beam of her flashlight. Succinyl chloride, 20 milligrams per milliliter. Holy hell! Brennan breathed over his shoulder. The vial was empty, but not disposed of properly. Not in a sharps container or biohazard bin where it should have been. Someone had hidden it here, pushed it to the back of a supply alcove where it might never be found. Unless someone was specifically looking. And there, on the glass, Sarah could see a partial fingerprint clear enough to possibly lift. Jenny, who has access to this alcove? Sarah's voice was deadly calm. Everyone on staff, doctors, nurses, residents, even some of the order. Like I said, it's just routine supplies, so there's no restricted access. Jenny had gone pale, understanding finally dawning. But succinyl isn't routine. That's a controlled substance. It shouldn't be here at all. When was the last time inventory was done on controlled medications? Every shift change. Every 8 hours. The pharmacy tracks everything down to the milliliter. Jenny's hands were shaking now. If succinyl went missing, it should have been flagged immediately. Unless someone had falsified the records, unless someone with authority and access had made sure the discrepancy never showed up on any report. Sarah's mind was racing through possibilities, connecting dots that formed a picture she desperately didn't want to see. I need the staffing records for December 18th through 21st, Sarah said. Every person who worked this floor during Emma's final admission, doctors, nurses, specialists, cleaning crew, everyone. I can't just give you patient records and staffing information without proper authorization. A child was murdered in this hospital. Sarah's voice cut through Jenny's protests like ice. Someone with access to this floor, this room, and controlled medications injected a 7-year-old girl with a paralytic agent and watched her suffocate. So you can give me those records voluntarily, or I can come back with a warrant and make this hospital's liability nightmare even worse. Your choice. Jenny made her choice. 20 minutes later, Sarah was sitting in an empty consultation room with a stack of printouts spread across the table, her eyes burning from lack of sleep and the fluorescent lights overhead. Brennan sat across from her, Rex lying at his feet, the dog's work done for now. The staffing records told a story, but it was one that raised more questions than it answered. Dr. Raymond Garrett had been on duty every night of Emma's final admission. So had 3 regular nurses Jenny Marchinis, who Sarah had just interviewed. Patricia Wang, a 15-year veteran, and Marcus Thompson, a newer hire, who'd only been on the ward for 6 months. There'd also been a rotating cast of residents, specialists who'd consulted on Emma's case, and night shift orderlies. But one name appeared on the logs with disturbing frequency, marked as visitor rather than staff. David Hartley, Emma's father. He'd been there every single night, sometimes for 12 hours straight, his badge scans showing him entering Emma's room at regular intervals. The last scan was at 2:43 a.m. on December 21st. 4 minutes before Emma's recorded time of death, Sarah's stomach turned over. She'd been a cop long enough to know that statistically, Family members were often the perpetrators in child death cases. But David Hartley was a fellow officer, a man who'd served the department for 16 years, who'd been decorated twice for bravery, who'd sat in that church pew 3 days ago looking like his soul had been ripped out of his chest. Could he have murdered his own daughter? Sarah. Brennan's voice was quiet, careful. You're thinking what I'm thinking. I'm thinking a lot of things, and none of them make sense. She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her like quicksand. Why would David kill Emma? She was his whole world. He took leave from work to be with her during treatment. He and Michelle were already drowning in medical debt. There is no financial motive. And if he wanted to end her suffering, why use succinylcholine? Why make her death terrifying instead of peaceful? People snap, Brennan offered, but he didn't sound convinced. Caretaker stress, watching your child suffer, knowing she's dying anyway. Maybe he thought he was doing her a favor by paralyzing her and making her suffocate. That's not mercy. That's cruelty. Sarah stood and began pacing, her mind refusing to settle on any one theory. There's something we're missing. Something that connects all of this. The door opened suddenly. Captain Marcus Webb filled the doorway, his face thunderous. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers Sarah didn't recognize and, more ominously, Lieutenant Patricia Moss from Internal Affairs. Detective Chun, Webb's voice could have frozen fire. You're done. Badge and gun. Now, Captain, I can explain. You demanded an exhumation without proper authorization. You've been conducting an unauthorized investigation in a hospital without a warrant. You've made accusations that have destroyed a grieving family's privacy and put this department in a legal nightmare. Webb held out his hand. I don't want explanations. I want your badge. Sarah looked at Brennan, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at Rex, who watched her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any dog should. Then she looked at the stack of records on the table, at the evidence that pointed to murder even if she could yet prove who'd done it or why. I'm close, she said quietly. Give me 48 hours. You're not getting 48 minutes. Webb's hand didn't waver. Badge gone now. Sarah Chun had spent 12 years building her career, earning respect, proving she belonged in homicide. She'd played by the rules, followed protocols, done everything right. But Emma Hartley hadn't followed any rules. She'd just been a 7-year-old girl who'd loved a dog and trusted the people around her. And someone had murdered her for it. Sarah pulled her badge from her belt and set it on the table. Her service weapon followed. The sound of her career ending was quieter than she'd expected. I'll find who did this, she said, meeting Webb's eyes, with or without the badge. If you continue this investigation as a civilian, you'll be charged with obstruction. Lieutenant Moss spoke for the first time, her voice flat and professional. Walk away, Chun, before you make this worse. But Sarah Chun had never been good at walking away, especially not from the truth. The apartment Sarah called home was a 3rd-floor walk-up, in a building that had seen better decades, with radiators that clanked like ghosts in chains and windows that whistled when the wind blew hard. She'd lived here for 8 years, and in all that time she'd never felt the space as empty as she did now. Stripped of her badge and gun, officially, barred from the one thing that had defined her adult life. The clock on her microwave blinked the time in angry red numbers. Christmas Day. While families across the city unwrapped presents and pretended the world was good, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by files she'd technically stolen, photographs she had no legal right to possess, and a laptop that was probably going to get her arrested. But she couldn't stop. Stopping meant Emma Hartley's killer walked free. Stopping meant Rex's desperate attempt to reveal the truth had been for nothing. Stopping meant Sarah had wasted 12 years believing justice actually mattered. Her phone buzzed. The 17th call from Captain Webb in the last 4 hours. She ignored it and returned to the hospital records spread across her table. The stuff-in logs, visitor records, medication inventories, Emma's complete medical file that Dr. Okafor had accidentally sent to Sarah's personal email before the suspension came down. Every piece was a fragment of a larger puzzle, but the picture refused to come clear. David Hartley's badge scans placed him at the hospital constantly during Emma's final days, but that wasn't suspicious. That was what any devoted father would do. The succinylcholine vial hidden in the supply alcove had been sent to the lab for fingerprint analysis, but results wouldn't come back for days, maybe weeks, given the holiday schedule, and even if they found prints, that didn't prove who'd injected Emma. It just proved who'd touched a vial that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Sarah pulled up Emma's medical records again, scanning through pages of doctor's notes, nursing assessments, lab results that read like foreign languages even after 12 years of seeing death in its infinite varieties. The girl's treatment history was extensive and heartbreaking. 2 years of chemotherapy, radiation, bone marrow biopsies, transfusions, infections, setbacks, brief moments of hope followed by crushing disappointments. But something in the final day's notes caught Sarah's attention. Dr. Raymond Garrett had written on December 19th, just 2 days before Emma's death. Patient showing unexpected improvement in white blood cell count. Energy levels increased. Family cautiously optimistic. Discussed potential for experimental trial if current trend continues. Sarah read it again. Then, again, unexpected improvement. Potential for experimental trial. Cautiously optimistic. Emma hadn't been dying when she was killed. She'd been getting better. Sarah's hand had knocked her cold coffee to the floor without her noticing. Her entire focus locked on those 3 words. Unexpected improvement. The medical examiner, the police reports, everyone had operated under the assumption that Emma had been terminal, that her death was expected even if the method was suspicious. But if she'd been improving, if there'd been hope for recovery or at least remission, the motive shifted. Completely, irreversibly. Who would want Emma Hartley dead if she was getting better instead of worse? Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Life insurance policies sometimes didn't pay out for terminal illnesses if death occurred too quickly. Medical trials had exclusion criteria that eliminated patients who showed spontaneous improvement. Research grants depended on specific patient outcomes. Or maybe it was simpler, crueler, more human. Sarah opened a new browser tab and searched for Emma Hartley fundraising. The results flooded her screen. GoFundMe pages, local news articles, community fundraisers. Emma's battle with cancer had captured the town's attention, inspired charity events, driven thousands of dollars in donations to help the Hartley family with medical expenses. The primary fundraising page had been created by Michelle Hartley, Emma's mother. Sarah clicked through to it, her eyes scanning the updates posted over the last 2 years. The writing was emotional, raw, each post a window into a mother's desperate love for her dying child. The most recent update was from December 15th, 6 days before Emma's death. Our sweet Emma is struggling. The doctors say her body is too weak to fight anymore. We're running out of options and running out of time. Please continue to pray for our miracle. Every donation helps us give Emma the comfort and care she deserves in whatever time we have left. Thank you for loving our girl as much as we do. The fundraising goal had been $50,000. The campaign had raised $63,000, and according to the page's transparency settings, The funds were controlled solely by Michelle Hartley, with no co-administrators, no joint access. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up financial records she had no authorization to access, but knew how to find anyway after 12 years of following money trails. Bank accounts, credit cards, mortgage records, the digital fingerprints of financial desperation that told stories bodies never could. The Hartley family was drowning, not just struggling drowning. Medical debt exceeded $200,000. Their mortgage was 3 months behind. David's salary as a patrol officer barely covered basic expenses, and Michelle hadn't worked since Emma's diagnosis. Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans from 3 different lenders. A second mortgage on a house that was worth less than they owed. But the fundraising account, $63,000, sitting in an account controlled by Michelle Hartley, December 22nd. The day after Emma died. Sarah pulled up the withdrawal records, her heart hammering against her ribs. $20,000 transferred to a personal checking account. Another $15,000 cashier's check, the remaining balance still sitting there, earmarked for Emma's ongoing care on a website that thousands of donors checked regularly. Care for a child who was already dead. "Oh God," Sarah whispered to her empty apartment. Michelle, it fit horribly, perfectly. It fit. Michie Hartley desperate and drowning in debt, watching her daughter suffer through treatments that cost more than most people earned in years. Then Emma starts improving, and suddenly the experimental trial Dr. Garrett mentioned becomes possible. Recovery becomes possible, which means the fundraising ends. The donations stop. The community moves on to the next tragedy, and Michelle still has $200,000 in medical debt and a mortgage she can't pay, unless Emma dies, unless the donations keep coming, sympathy flowing like wine. Everyone so focused on the grieving mother that no one questions where the money goes. Michelle had the motive, financial desperation. She had the opportunity. She'd even too sick to visit during Emma's final days, but that could have been a cover, a way to avoid being on the hospital's visitor logs while still having access to her daughter's room. But the means? How would Michelle, who had no medical training, no access to controlled substances, get her hands on? Sarah dug deeper, pulling up Michelle Hartley's employment history. Before Emma's diagnosis, Michelle had worked as an administrative assistant at St. Mary's Hospital in the anesthesiology department. There it was, the final piece. Michelle had worked in the anesthesiology department at the same hospital where Emma was being treated. She would have known the protocols, known where medications were stored, known how to access supplies without raising suspicion. She might even still have had badge access if her credentials had been properly deactivated when she went on leave. Sarah checked the hospital's badge system, her fingers trembling on the keyboard. Michelle Hartley's access badge was listed as inactive, but the deactivation date was December 23rd, 2 days after Emma's death. For 2 full days, Michelle's badge would have worked to get her into restricted areas, including the medication storage where controlled substances were kept. Had Michelle visited the hospital during Emma's final admission, despite claiming to be too sick? Had she used her old badge to slip in unnoticed, to access the medications she needed to inject her own daughter with a paralytic agent while the nursing staff was distracted? Sarah's phone rang again. Not Captain Webb this time, but a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, then saw the area code. Local. She answered. Detective Chun. The voice was female, young, frightened. This is Jenny Martinez. From the hospital. I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I remembered something. About the night Emma died. I'm listening. Sarah grabbed a pen, her exhaustion forgotten. You asked about who had access to the supply alcove. I told you everyone on staff, but I forgot about former staff. We had a problem last month with badge access not being deactivated properly when people left. Someone from HR came through and did a mass deactivation, but I remember checking the logs afterward and seeing entries that shouldn't have been there. I pulled them up again tonight because I couldn't sleep. Michelle Hartley's badge showed activity on December 20th. She was in the building December 20th, the day before Emma died. Where did she go? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The anesthesiology department. Her old department. The badge scan shows her accessing the controlled medication storage at 11:47 p.m. Jenny's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I should have caught this sooner. I should have you caught it now. That's what matters. Sarah was already moving, grabbing her jacket, her keys, her laptop. Jenny, did you tell anyone else about this? No, just you. Should I? Don't tell anyone. Not yet. And stay somewhere safe tonight. Sarah ended the call and stood in her apartment, her mind clicking through the next moves like chess pieces on a board. She had motive, means, and opportunity. She had badge access logs and financial records. She had a pattern of behavior that pointed to one conclusion. Michelle Hartley had murdered her own daughter for money, but she didn't have proof that would hold up in court. Everything Sarah had gathered was circumstantial at best, illegally obtained at worst. She needed a confession. She needed Michelle to admit what she'd done, which meant Sarah needed to do something spectacularly stupid. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd sworn never to use again. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. Chun, thought you were suspended. I am. I need a favor anyway. Sarah grabbed her car keys. You still have that surveillance van with the recording equipment? Marcus Reaper Thompson had left the force 5 years ago under circumstances no one talked about. But he'd been a good cop once, and he owed Sarah his freedom after she'd buried evidence that would have sent him to prison. Calling in that debt now was either brilliant or the worst decision of her life. What are you planning? Reaper's voice carried a note of concern. Something that'll either solve a murder or get me arrested for harassment. Possibly both. When and where? Sarah gave him the address. The Hartley family home, a small ranch house on Maple Street, where a grieving mother was currently sitting on $63,000 in fundraising money meant for a daughter she killed. 30 minutes, Reaper confirmed. And Chun, whatever you're doing, make it count. You don't get second chances at this. Sarah knew. God, she knew. But Emma Hartley hadn't gotten a second chance at life, so Sarah sure as hell wasn't going to waste her second chance at justice. The drive across town took 22 minutes through empty Christmas Day streets, past houses lit up with decorations and families gathered in warm kitchens. Sarah's hands were steady on the wheel, her mind clear for the first time in days. She wasn't a detective anymore. She was unbound by protocols or chain of command or the rules that had governed her entire adult life. She was just a woman who made a promise to a dead child and a dog who refused to let the truth stay buried. And sometimes that was enough. The Hartley house sat dark and silent on Maple Street, a small ranch-style home with peeling paint and a sagging front porch that spoke of deferred maintenance and financial struggles that predated Emma's illness by years. Christmas lights hung unlit along the roofline, installed weeks ago when there'd still been hope, now just dark reminders of a holiday that would never feel the same. Sarah parked 2 houses down, her Honda tucked between a pickup truck and a minivan, trying to look like she belonged in this working-class neighborhood where cop salaries bought 30-year mortgages and constant anxiety about making ends meet. Reaper's surveillance van was already in position across the street, disguised as a contractor's vehicle, complete with faded magnetic signs advertising Thompson Electrical Services. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. "Equipment hot. You're wired. Don't get yourself killed." She clipped the tiny microphone to her collar, feeling the weight of it like an accusation. This was entrapment. This was harassment. This was a dozen violations of civil rights and legal procedure. But it was also the only way to get Michelle Hartley talking, to get her on record admitting what she'd done. Sarah had spent the drive over rehearsing her approach, trying to find the right words that would crack through Michelle's grief and guilt and defensive walls. The truth was, she didn't know if Michelle Hartley was a monster or just a desperate woman who made a monstrous choice. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe Sarah was completely wrong about everything and was about to destroy an innocent woman's life on Christmas morning. But Rex had known. The dog had smelled death and deception at that funeral, had refused to let it be buried with Emma's tiny body. Sarah had to trust that instinct, had to believe that somewhere in the evidence and the timelines and the financial desperation was the truth. She walked up the driveway, her breath steaming in the pre-dawn cold, and knocked on the front door. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. Lights didn't come on immediately. Sarah had expected that. It was not yet 5 in the morning on Christmas, and the Hartleys had buried their daughter 3 days ago. Sleep, if it came at all, would be hard won and easily shattered. She knocked again, harder. A light flickered on in the back of the house. Footsteps, slow and heavy. Then the porch light blazed to life, and Sarah heard the deadbolt slide open. Michelle Hartley looked like she'd aged 20 years in 3 days. Her hair hung limp and unwashed, her face pale and blotchy from crying, her eyes redrimmed and hollow. She wore an oversized sweatshirt that probably belonged to David and pajama pants that had seen better years. When she saw Sarah standing on her porch, confusion flickered across her features, then recognition, then something harder. "Detective Chen." Michelle's voice was hoarse. Or should I say, "I heard you were suspended." "I was. I am." Sarah kept her hands visible, non-threatening. "Que y come in. I need to talk to you about Emma. My lawyer said not to talk to anyone from the police." But Michelle didn't close the door. She stood there in the doorway, wrapped in grief and exhaustion, looking like a strong wind could knock her over. "I'm not here as police. I'm not here in any official capacity." Sarah met her eyes and held them. "I'm here because I think you need to tell someone what really happened. And I think that someone might as well be me." For a long moment, Michelle just stared. Then, inexplicably, she stepped back and opened the door wider. 5 minutes. "Dave is asleep in the bedroom, and I don't want him waking up to find you here." Sarah stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The house smelled like old coffee and unwashed laundry and the specific kind of despair that settles into walls when hope dies. The living room was cluttered with sympathy cards and flower arrangements that were starting to wilt. Casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors stacked on every surface. And photos. God, so many photos of Emma as a baby Emma, starting kindergarten. Emma with Rex Emma in a hospital bed with a brave smile and a bald head. A little girl who should have had decades ahead of her, reduced to memories and frozen moments. "I didn't kill her," Michelle said flatly, settling onto the couch like her bones hurt. "I know that's why you're here. I know what people are saying, but I didn't." Sarah remained standing, choosing her words carefully. "I know you were at the hospital the night before Emma died. Your badge access." shows you entering the anesthesiology department at 11:47 p.m. on December 20th. Michelle's face didn't change. I used to work there. I went to clean out my old locker. HR had been hounding me for months to pick up my stuff. At midnight, the day before your daughter died, Sarah kept her voice gentle, not accusatory. That's quite a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. It's a desperate woman who couldn't sleep, who could unsit at home thinking about medical bills and funeral costs and how she was going to survive after Emma... Michelle's voice broke. I needed to do something. Anything. So I went to get my stuff from my locker. That's all. Did you access the controlled medication storage while you were there? No. The answer came too quickly. Too defensive. Why would I? I don't have authorization for that anymore. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Michelle the badge access logs that Jenny Martinez had sent. The records were clear. Michelle's badge had accessed not just the anesthesiology department, but the specific medication storage room where controlled substances like succinylcholine. Michelle stared at the screen, and something in her face crumbled. Not guilt exactly, but the exhaustion of maintaining a lie that was too heavy to carry anymore. I needed sleeping pills, she whispered. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. The doctors wouldn't prescribe anything strong enough because they said I needed to be alert for Emma. But I had friends in the department who looked the other way while I grabbed a bottle of Ambien. That's all I took. Just sleeping pills. It was almost believable. Almost. Sarah had seen enough desperate people, enough addicts and grief-stricken family members to know that the line between survival and crime was thinner than most people wanted to admit. But the badge logs didn't lie, and neither did the succinylcholine vial hidden in the supply alcove on Emma's floor. Michelle, I need you to tell me the truth. Sarah sat down across from her, leaning forward, making this conversation intimate and human instead of... Emma was getting better. Dr. Garrett's notes say she was showing unexpected improvement, that she might have qualified for an experimental trial. She wasn't dying when she died. She was recovering. She had cancer. Michelle's voice rose, defensive and sharp. She had cancer, and it was killing her, and we were out of options, and out of money, and out of hope. But she wasn't out of time. Sarah pressed forward, watching Michelle's face for cracks in the facade. That's what changed, isn't it? As long as Emma was terminal, the fundraising made sense. People donated because they wanted to help ease her suffering, make her comfortable, give her family time to say goodbye. But if she recovered, if she went into remission and lived, then we'd still be drowning in debt. Michelle finished bitterly. $200,000 in medical bills for treatments that insurance barely covered. A mortgage we can't pay. Credit destroyed. Our entire future mortgaged against a child who might die anyway because cancer always comes back. Always. There it was. The motive laid bare not as malice, but as cold economic calculation. The grinding, soul-destroying reality of medical debt in a system that treated healthcare like a commodity and families like profit centers. But understanding motive didn't make murder acceptable. You killed her, Sarah said quietly. You went to the hospital, accessed the medication stores with your old badge, took a vial of succinylcholine, and injected it into Emma's IV. While David was... Where was he? I didn't. Michelle started, then stopped. Her hands were shaking. You don't understand. You can't understand. Then help me understand. Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Help me understand how a mother injects her own daughter with a paralytic agent and watches her suffocate. Help me understand how you could do that to Emma." Michelle Hartley broke. Not dramatically, not with tears or confessions or the cathartic breakdown that movies promised. She just ... broke. Her shoulders sagged. Her face went slack. And when she spoke again, her voice was empty of everything except exhaustion. "David doesn't know. That's the only thing I care about now." "David can't know." "Know what?" Sarah's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "That I killed our daughter to save our family." Michelle laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's what I told myself. Anyway, that if Emma died now, while people were still sympathetic, while the donations were still coming in, we could pay off enough debt to survive. We could keep the house. David could keep working without the stress killing him, and Emma wouldn't have to suffer through more treatments that might not work anyway." The clock ticked in the silence. "But that wasn't your decision to make," Sarah said. "No, it wasn't." Michelle met her eyes, and Sarah saw something there that was worse than guilt, worse than shame. She saw acceptance. "But I made it anyway. I went to the hospital that night. I used my old badge. I took the succinylcholine because I knew what it would do, how it would look like heart failure in a child with her medical history. And then I came back the next night when David had gone to get coffee, when Emma was alone." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I loved her." Michelle's voice was flat, emotionless, the affect of someone who'd cried themselves beyond feeling. "I told her it would be quick, that she wouldn't be in pain anymore, that she could rest. But that was a lie. She knew." The moment I pushed the medication, Emma's eyes went wide, and she tried to scream but couldn't because the paralytic was already working. She looked at me like I'd betrayed her. Because I had the room spun. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down and forced herself to keep listening, to get every word on record. "How long did it take?" 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Michelle's eyes were distant, seeing something Sarah couldn't. I counted. I held her hand and counted every second while my daughter suffocated, unable to move, unable to call for help, just her eyes begging me to stop. And when it was over, when she was gone, I called for the nurse, and I screamed and I cried like my heart was breaking. It wasn't, oh, it was. Michelle looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen hell and lived in it. It broke the moment I made the decision. Everything after was just ... Aftermath. Sarah stood on shaking legs, her mind already moving to what came next. Arrest, trial, justice, if such a thing existed for a crime like this. But before she could speak, heavy footsteps sounded from the back of the house, and David Hartley appeared in the doorway, his service weapon in his hand and his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Michelle's voice cracked. "What's going on? Why is Detective Chen here?" Michelle looked at her husband, at the man she'd tried to protect with murder, and whatever was left of her composure finally shattered. "David, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And Sarah Chen knew that no matter what happened next, no matter how the trial went or what sentence Michelle received, some crimes could never be forgiven, only witnessed, only remembered, only mourned. David Hartley's gun didn't waver, but his hands did. The weapon shook in his grip like it weighed 1,000 pounds. pointed at no one and everyone, his finger nowhere near the trigger but the threat implicit in his presence, in his confusion, in the way his world was clearly shattering in real time. Behind him, dawn was just starting to paint the windows gray, Christmas morning arriving with all the weight of tragedy and none of the joy. "Someone tell me what the hell is happening," David said, his voice raw. "Michelle, Chun, why are you confessing to?" He stopped, the words catching in his throat as the implications crashed through him like a wave. No, that's not possible. Emma died from her cancer, the doctors said. The doctors were wrong. Michelle stood slowly, her movements careful, like sudden motion might cause her husband to finally break. Or maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe I just made sure their prediction came true faster than it would have naturally. David's weapon hit the carpet with a muffled thud, and he stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the wall. Sarah watched him process it. The denial, the understanding, the horror, the betrayal. Emotions flickering across his face, too fast to track. She'd seen this moment before in other cases. When family members learned the truth about someone they loved, the human mind wasn't built to reconcile love with monstrosity, devotion with murder. "You killed Emma." The words came out flat, disbelieving. "You killed our daughter. I ended her suffering." Michelle's voice gained strength, the defensive walls building back up even as everything else fell apart. She was dying anyway. David, you know she was. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe months if we were lucky. Months of more chemo, more hospitals, more pain. I gave her peace. You gave her a paralytic agent that made her suffocate while fully conscious, Sarah interjected, her voice cutting through the delusion. That's not peace. That's torture. David's niece gave out. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, making sounds that were somewhere between sobs and hyperventilation. Sarah wanted to give him space, wanted to let him process this devastating truth privately. But she had a job to complete even without her badge. "David, I need you to stay calm," she said, moving toward him slowly. "I know this is... Stay calm." He looked up at her with eyes that had gone hollow. "My wife murdered my daughter, and you want me to stay calm. How do you stay calm for something like this? You breathe, you focus, you remember that Emma deserves justice, and falling apart right now doesn't give her that." Sarah knelt beside him, her voice gentler. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" David's laugh was bitter. "I trusted Michelle. I trusted the doctors. I trusted that good things happen to good people and bad things are just random chaos. How's that working out?" "Not great," Sarah admitted, "but I'm still asking you to trust me anyway." Outside, the first real light of Christmas morning was creeping across the lawn, painting frost-covered grass in shades of gold and amber. In Reaper's van across the street, recording equipment was capturing every word, building a case that would send Michelle Hartley to prison for the rest of her life. "You need backup. This is getting volatile," came Reaper's voice through her earpiece. She signaled negative, but someone had called the police anyway. Probably a neighbor who'd seen Sarah arrive, who'd heard raised voices, who'd noticed David's gun. The Christmas morning quiet was about to be shattered by squad cars and questions, in the full machinery of the justice system grinding back into motion. "Michelle, I need you to do exactly what I say," Sarah said, standing and turning to face the other woman. "When the officers arrive, you're going to tell them you want to make a full confession. You're going to waive your right to an attorney for now." Why would I do that? Michelle's defiance was crumbling, but she wasn't completely broken yet, because if you fight this, if you make the DA prove everything in court, They'll bring Emma's medical records into evidence. They'll show photos of her body. They'll put David on the stand and make him relive every moment of that night. Sarah's voice hardened. You can spare him that. You can give one final gift to your family and confess. Plead guilty, accept your sentence without dragging everyone through a trial. That's the only dignity you have left to offer. The sirens were closer now, maybe 2 blocks away. David was still on the floor, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Michelle looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted from defensive to devastated. I thought I was saving us, she whispered. I thought if Emma died now, with the fundraising still active, we could pay off the debt, keep the house, give you a future that wasn't buried under medical bills. I thought I was being practical. You were being a murderer, Sarah said flatly. There's no pretty word for what you did. The police cars arrived in a chorus of sirens and flashing lights that strobed through the windows, turning the modest living room into a nightmare disco of red and blue. Sarah heard car doors slamming, voices shouting, commands, the heavy footsteps of officers approaching the house. She moved to the front door and opened it before they could knock, her hands visible and empty. Detective Chun, the officer at the front, was young, maybe 25. He looked confused to see her. Ma'am, you're not supposed to be conducting. I'm not conducting anything official, Sarah interrupted. But the woman inside just confessed to murdering her daughter. You'll want to bring Captain Webb and a recorder. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of procedure and protocol. Captain Webb arrived, his face thunderous when he saw Sarah, but softening slightly when he heard Michelle's confession playing back. Lieutenant Moss from Internal Affairs was there, to her expression unreadable as she listened to Michelle describe in detail how she'd stolen succinylcholine, how she'd waited for David to leave Emma's room, how she'd injected the paralytic and watched her daughter die. David Hartley sat through all of it, still as a statue, tears running silently down his face. When Michelle finished her confession and the officers moved to arrest her, he finally spoke. Why didn't you just ask me? His voice was broken, barely audible. We could have figured something out. We could have sold the house, declared bankruptcy, lived in an apartment. Why didn't you just ask me if I'd rather be poor or rather be without Emma? Michelle had no answer for that. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe she'd convinced herself that David would choose solvency over their daughter. Or maybe she'd never really asked the question at all. Maybe she'd just seen a problem and solved it the only way her exhausted, desperate mind could conceive. But the why didn't matter anymore. Only the what? Only the truth? Michelle Hartley, you're under arrest for the murder of Emma Rose Hartley. The officer reading the Miranda rights was professional, careful, making sure every word was clear. Michelle didn't resist. She held out her wrists for the cuffs, her face empty of everything except exhaustion, and let herself be led toward the waiting patrol car. Sarah watched from the porch as they loaded Michelle into the back seat. As David stood in the doorway of his house, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered, as Christmas morning continued its arrival across a neighborhood that would be talking about this day for decades. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow sense of completion, like finishing a race, only to discover the finish line was actually a cliff edge. Chun! Captain Webb's voice made her turn. He stood with Lieutenant Moss, both of them wearing expressions that were hard to read. You got a confession. You solved the case. You also violated about 17 departmental policies and probably a few laws. I know, Sarah said simply. The DA is still deciding whether to press charges against you for illegal wiretapping and harassment. Webb's expression softened fractionally, but they're also recognizing that without your unorthodox methods, we'd have buried a murdered child and let her killer walk free. So they're offering a deal. Sarah waited, too exhausted to feel hope or fear. You resign quietly. No hearing, no press conference, no demand. You turn in your credentials, sign a non-disclosure agreement about the methods you used, and walk away. Lieutenant Moss pulled out a folder of papers. In exchange, no criminal charges. Clean slate. You can work private investigation if you want, but you're done with the department. It was more generous than Sarah expected, more generous than she probably deserved. She thought about 12 years of service, of cases solved and lives saved, of the career she'd built brick by brick through competence and dedication. Then she thought about Emma Hartley, and the choice became simple. Where do I sign? 3 months later, Sarah Chen stood outside the Riverside Canine Training Facility watching. Rex worked through an obstacle course with Officer Jake Brennan, the German Shepherd, moving with the fluid grace of a born athlete, his joy in the work evident in every leap and sprint. The winter had been long and brutal, but spring was coming early this year, bringing with it the promise of renewal and the hollow hope that time healed all wounds. It didn't, of course. Time just made wounds familiar, bearable, part of the landscape of who you were. "He's doing well," Brennan said, joining Sarah at the fence line. Rex had completed his run and was now lying in a patch of sunlight, tongue lolling, looking pleased with himself. The department shrink cleared him for full duty last week. No lasting trauma from the funeral incident. Dogs are better at processing grief than humans, Sarah observed. They live in the present. They don't torture themselves with what-ifs and should-ifs. Unlike some detectives I know. Brennan gave her a sidelong look. "You doing okay?" "Really? Was she?" Sarah wasn't sure anymore. Since resigning from the force, she'd been working private investigation. Mostly insurance fraud and cheating spouses cases that paid the bills but did unsatisfy the part of her that needed to matter. She'd testified at Michelle Hartley's trial, watched the woman receive life without parole, and felt nothing except a vague sense that justice was a concept that sounded better in theory than it felt in practice. David Hartley had attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with the stoic expression of a man who'd already processed every emotion the human heart could hold and had come out the other side empty. He'd given victim impact statements that reduced the courtroom to tears, but his voice had remained steady, factual, describing Emma as she'd been, bright and brave and full of love for a world that had not loved her back enough to save her. "I'm surviving," Sarah finally answered Brennan's question. "Some days that feels like enough." Rex had noticed her now and was trotting over, his tail wagging in that way dogs have of greeting people they remember fondly. Sarah knelt and let him press his solid warmth against her, his fur soft under her fingers. "You saved her, you know," Brennan said quietly. "Emma. By listening to Rex, by refusing to let it go, you made sure she mattered, that her death meant something." "Her death shouldn't have had to mean anything," Sarah replied, her throat tight. "She should have lived. She should have gone to 3rd grade and learned multiplication and complained about homework. She should have grown up." "Yeah, she should have." Brennan crouched beside Sarah. Both of them focused on Rex like he held answers to questions they didn't know how to ask. "But since she didn't, since someone took that from her, at least you made sure the truth came out. That counts for something, did it?" Sarah wanted to believe it did. She wanted to believe that justice, however imperfect, however delayed, mattered in the cosmic accounting of right and wrong. But mostly she just felt tired. Tired of death and human cruelty and the endless ways people found to hurt each other. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, demanding attention, pulling her out of the spiral of dark thoughts. She smiled despite herself and scratched behind his ears. "You're a good boy," she told him. The best boy. You knew Emma deserved better, and you didn't give up until someone listened. The dog's tail wagged harder, understanding tone, if not words, and Sarah felt something in her chest loosen fractionally. Maybe Brennan was right. Maybe making sure the truth mattered did count for something. Maybe that was all any of them could do bear witness. Refuse to look away. Insist that the dead deserve to be remembered as more than just victims. The Hartley house sold last week, Brennan mentioned after a moment. David bought a small apartment across town. Started going to therapy, I heard. Trying to rebuild something from the wreckage. Sarah nodded. She'd thought about reaching out to David, offering some words of comfort or solidarity, but what could she possibly say? Sorry your wife murdered your daughter seemed inadequate. Sorry I had to destroy your family to find the truth seemed so she'd said nothing, and the silence had grown until it became its own form of statement. You ever think about getting a dog? Brennan asked, shifting the subject. Rex has a cousin in the breeding program. Smart as hell. Good temperament. Could use a home with someone who understands working dogs. The offer was kind, and Sarah knew it came from a good place. But she wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. She could barely take care of herself most days, could barely remember to eat meals or sleep regular hours. Adding another life to her responsibility felt like too much weight on foundations that were already cracking. Maybe someday, she said, which was the polite way of saying no. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. She pulled it out, expecting spam or a wrong number, but the message made her breath catch in her throat. Ms. Chun, this is David Hartley. I know we haven't spoken since the trial. I was wondering if you might have time to meet for coffee. There's something I need to tell you about Emma. Something I should have mentioned months ago. Sarah showed the message to Brennan, whose expression tightened with concern. You don't have to respond. You don't owe him anything. I owe Emma, Sarah said quietly. She typed back a response. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Coffee Bean on Main Street. The reply came immediately. Thank you. The next morning found Sarah sitting in a corner booth at Coffee Bean, nursing her third cup of black coffee and watching the door with the wariness of someone who'd learned that surprises were rarely pleasant. David Hartley arrived exactly at 10, looking thinner than he had at the trial, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes that hung loose on his frame. He'd aged a decade in 3 months, his hair grayer, his face lined with suffering that no amount of therapy could completely erase. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sliding into the booth across from her. His hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around the coffee cup the waitress brought without him having to order. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Sarah admitted. What did you need to tell me about Emma? David stared into his coffee like it held answers, or maybe just the courage to speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes were re-dimmed but clear. Michelle wasn't the only one who knew Emma was getting better. I knew too. Dr. Garrett had told me about the experimental trial, about how Emma's numbers were improving beyond expectations. I was so happy. For the first time in 2 years, I let myself believe we might actually beat this thing. Sarah's stomach nodded. David, if you're about to confess to something, I'm not confessing. I'm explaining. His voice was firm, despite the tremor in his hands. The night Emma died, I went to get coffee, like Michelle said, but I was gone longer than I told the investigators. I was in the hospital chapel, praying, thanking God for giving us hope again. I was so focused on my gratitude that I left Emma alone for almost 40 minutes instead of the 15 minutes I claimed. If I'd been there, David continued, his voice breaking, if I hadn't been so selfish, so wrapped up in my own relief, Michelle wouldn't have had the opportunity. Emma would still be alive. My daughter died because I couldn't stay in the room with her for one more hour. Sarah felt the familiar weight of survivors, guilt, the brutal mathematics of who-ifs that destroyed people from the inside out. She'd seen it in victims' families before. The way they tortured themselves with alternate timelines where they made different choices and everyone lived happily ever after. But that wasn't how life worked. That wasn't how murder worked. David, listen to me carefully, she said, leaning forward. Michelle made a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice to murder your daughter. She acquired the means. She found the opportunity. And she executed her plan. If you hadn't gone to the chapel, she would have found another moment. If Emma had been getting worse instead of better, Michelle might have let her die naturally. But Emma was improving, and that threatened Michelle's solution to your financial problems. So she acted. None of that is your fault. Intellectually, I know that. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. My therapist tells me the same thing 3 times a week. But knowing it and believing it are different things. Yeah, they are. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people bound together by tragedy and the complicated aftermath of truth. Sarah thought about all the cases she'd worked over 12 years. All the families she'd delivered bad news to. All the lives that had been irreversibly altered by violence and loss. The job had taught her that closure was a myth, that justice was imperfect, and that the best anyone could do was keep moving forward because the alternative was drowning in the past. There's something else, David said, pulling a manila envelope from his jacket. Emma kept a journal. The hospital therapist suggested it as a way to process her feelings about being sick. I found it when I was packing up the house. I thought you should see it. Sarah took the envelope carefully, feeling the weight of it like a sacred object. Why me? Because you read the only person who fought for her when everyone else had already written her off as a tragedy waiting to happen. David's voice strengthened with conviction. You listened to a dog when everyone thought you were crazy. You risked your career to find the truth. Emma would have liked you. Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out a small notebook covered in stickers, unicorns and rainbows and all the bright, innocent things that 7-year-olds loved. The pages inside were filled with careful handwriting, the letters large and slightly crooked, decorated with drawings of flowers and stars and, frequently, a German shepherd that was clearly Rex. She flipped to the last entry, dated December 20th, the day before Emma died. Today was a good day. Dr. Garrett says my numbers are better. Daddy is so happy he can't stop smiling. Mommy came to visit, but she seemed sad. I told her it's okay to be happy with me. Rex came too, and we played fetched with the tennis ball until the nurse said quiet time. I think maybe I'm going to be okay. I think maybe the cancer is finally giving up. I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight and fight and fight until I win. Love, Emma. Sarah closed the journal, her vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for 3 months. This was Emma, not the victim, not the case file, not the small coffin that Rex had refused to leave, but a real child with hope and dreams and a fighteress spirit that should have carried her through decades of life. Keep it, David said gently. I have photos and videos and 1,000 other memories. But this feels like it belongs with the person who made sure Emma's voice was heard. Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to say that David needed this more than she did. but she understood what he was really offering. Not a gift, but a burden shared. A reminder that Emma Hartley had been more than just a crime to solve. She'd been a person who deserved to be remembered. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. David stood, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. "I'm going back to work next month. Light duty at first, but the department thinks I'm ready." Captain Webb said, "They need good cops, and I need to feel useful again. We'll see how it goes." "It'll be hard," Sarah said, standing as well, seeing the cases, dealing with the families, remembering why you became a cop in the first place. "Yeah, but hard is better than numb." David extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the calluses of a working cop, the strength of someone who'd survive the unsurvivable. "Take care of yourself, Ms. Chen, and thank you for everything." He left the coffee shop without looking back, and Sarah sat down again. Emma's journal clutched in her hands, understanding finally settling over her like dawn after a long night. She hadn't saved Emma. She couldn't have. But she'd given the girl's death, meaning had refused to let it be buried under convenient lies and easy assumptions. And maybe, in a world that was brutal and unfair and filled with people who hurt the ones they should protect, that was enough. She read through more entries, learning about Emma's favorite foods and TV shows, her fears about dying and her dreams about growing up, her love for Rex and her parents and the nurses who'd become like family. Each page was a window into a life cut short, a reminder of everything that had been stolen by one desperate woman's terrible choice. Sarah's phone buzzed a new case. A husband who suspected his wife of embezzlement. Another thread in the endless tapestry of human deception and betrayal. She should take it. She needed the money, needed the distraction, needed something to fill the empty hours that stretched between sleeping and waking. But instead, she texted back, "I'll call you tomorrow." Something came up. Then she sat in that coffee shop booth for another 2 hours, reading Emma's journal from cover to cover, bearing witness to a little girl who'd fought cancer with more courage than most adults could summon, and making a silent promise to the child who'd trusted a dog to tell her truth. Emma Rose Hartley would not be forgotten. Not by Sarah Chen. Not ever. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received an invitation that surprised her more than anything had in the tumultuous year since Emma's death. It was formal, printed on heavy cardstock, the kind of invitation that meant someone had spent time and money to get it right. She stood now in front of a new building on the outskirts of Riverside, watching workers put finishing touches on landscaping and signage. The facility was modest but professional indoor and outdoor training areas, a veterinary clinic, administrative offices, and a memorial garden where a bronze statue of a German shepherd sat watch over a plaque dedicated to Emma. "You came." David Hartley approached from the parking lot, wearing his dress uniform, looking healthier than he had at the coffee shop 6 months ago. Not whole. Sarah doubted he'd ever be whole again, but functional, present, surviving. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't," Sarah admitted, echoing their earlier conversation. "What is this place?" "David, it's what I'm building from the wreckage." He gestured to the facility with something that might have been pride, the fundraising money that Michelle that was raised for Emma's care. Legally, it belonged to our family, but I couldn't keep it. Every dollar felt like blood money. So I worked with the department and some lawyers, and we established a foundation, the Emma Hartley Memorial Foundation. Sarah looked at the building with new understanding. "You're training K-9 officers. not just training them. We're revolutionizing how canine South are used in investigations. David's voice gained strength as he talked about his project. Rex proved that dogs can detect things we miss, that they can be instrumental in solving cases that might otherwise go cold. So we're developing specialized training programs, scent detection for crime scenes, cadaver recovery, even medical detection. Dogs that can smell cancer, heart disease, diabetes. Dogs that might save lives the way Rex saved Emma's truth. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but Sarah had learned that impossible was just another word for not yet attempted. The grand opening is next week, David continued. Local officials, department brass, news coverage, but I wanted you to see it first. You and Rex. This exists because you refused to give up, because you listened when a dog told you something was wrong. Sarah felt the weight of Emma's journal in her bag. She carried it with her most days now, a reminder of why she'd chosen this work in the first place. I just did what any decent cop would do. No, you did what most cops wouldn't have the courage to do. David met her eyes. You risked everything for a child you'd never met, for a truth that destroyed your career. That's not decent. That's heroic. Sarah didn't feel heroic. She felt tired and unemployed and uncertain about her future. But she'd learned that feelings weren't facts. That heroism wasn't about certainty or comfort. It was about doing the right thing, even when the cost was devastating. Can I show you something? David led her toward the memorial garden, where the bronze statue caught the late afternoon sunlight. The sculpture was remarkable. Rex, in perfect detail, sitting alert and watchful, his eyes seeming to follow visitors as they approached. The plaque beneath read, Emma Hosey Hartley, 2018 to 2025. She taught us that love is stronger than fear, hope is stronger than despair, and truth is stronger than death. In her memory, we train guardians who will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Sarah's throat tightened. It's beautiful. There's more. David pointed to a section of the garden where construction was still ongoing. We're building a training area specifically for cancer detection dogs. Early detection saves lives. And if we can train dogs to identify cancer cells through scent, we might prevent other families from going through what we went through, from what Emma went through. It was a vision born from tragedy, an attempt to build something meaningful from the ashes of destroyed lives. Sarah thought about all the cases she'd worked, all the victims who deserved better, all the families who'd been left to pick up pieces that would never quite fit back together. Most of the time, there was no happy ending, no silver lining, just the brutal reality of loss. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes people found a way to transform their grief into purpose. I have a job offer for you, David said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Director of Investigations for the Foundation. We need someone who understands both law enforcement and private investigation. Someone who can work with police departments to integrate canine units into cold cases. The pay isn't great, but it's steady. And it's meaningful work. Sarah took the envelope, her hands unsteady. Inside was a formal job description, salary details that were indeed modest, but livable, and a position that would let her do what she did best, find truth for people who deserved it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it? David smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him since before Emma died. We don't open officially for another month. You have time to decide. A car pulled into the parking lot. Brennan's truck, with Rex, visible in the passenger seat. The dog saw Sarah and started barking excitedly, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook. Brennan let him out, and Rex bounded across the grounds to where Sarah stood, nearly bowling her over with enthusiasm. "Hey, boy," she laughed, kneeling to accept his greeting. "Did you miss me?" Rex's answer was to lick her face thoroughly, then press against her legs like he was trying to become part of her. Sarah buried her fingers in his fur, feeling the solid warmth of him, and something in her chest that had been locked tight for months finally cracked open. This dog had known. When everyone else had been ready to bury Emma and move on, Rex had known something was wrong. He'd broken protocol, defied his training, and refused to let the truth stay hidden. In his simple, canine way, he'd been more dedicated to justice than most humans ever managed. "What do you think, Rex?" Sarah whispered. "Should I take the job? Should I help train more dogs like you?" The German Shepherd tilted his head, his dark eyes intelligent and knowing, and barked once. "Yes. Definitely, yes." Brennan joined them, looking at the facility with obvious approval. "This is impressive. David's been planning it for months. He wanted it to be perfect before he reached out to you. He's building something good from something terrible," Sarah said, standing. "I'm not sure I deserve to be part of it. Emma's journal says otherwise." Brennan had read it. David had shared copies with several people who'd been instrumental in finding the truth. She wrote about wanting to help people, about how she was going to be a doctor when she grew up so she could cure cancer. This is her dream, just in a different form. You'd be honoring her by being part of it. Sarah looked at the statue again, at the bronze Rex keeping eternal watch, at the plaque celebrating a child who should have had decades ahead of her. She thought about Michelle Hartley, sitting in a prison cell serving a life sentence, living with the knowledge that she'd murdered her own daughter for money. She thought about David, channeling his grief into purpose, building something that might save other children. And she thought about herself, former detective, current private investigator, forever haunted by the cases that slipped through the cracks of official justice. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'll take the job." David's relief was visible. "Thank you. Emma would have liked knowing you were a part of this." "I hope so." Sarah knelt beside Rex again, looking into his eyes. "We're going to be working together, buddy. Training other dogs to do what you did. To find truth when humans miss it. Think you can help with that." Rex barked again, his tail wagging like a flag in high wind, and Sarah knew she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the right one. The grand opening ceremony a month later drew crowds that spilled out of the facility and into the parking lot. Local news covered it extensively, interviewing David about his vision, showing footage of K9 South going through their paces, highlighting the memorial garden and Emma's story. Captain Webb gave a speech about the importance of K9 units in modern policing. The mayor cut a ribbon. A children's choir sang, but the moment that mattered most to Sarah was quiet and private. She stood in the memorial garden as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, with Rex sitting beside her and Emma's journal in her hands. She'd read it so many times that she'd memorized whole passages, but she opened it again to the last entry, reading Emma's words about fighting and hoping and refusing to give up. "I kept my promise," Sarah said softly to the statue, to the memory, to the ghost of a 7-year-old girl who'd trusted a dog to tell her truth. "I made sure you mattered. I made sure people remembered that you were here, that you fought, that you deserved better. And now we're going to help other people, other families, other kids who need someone to fight for them." The bronze Rex seemed to watch her with knowing eyes, and the real Rex pressed against her leg, warm and solid and present. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not healing exactly, Because some wounds never fully healed, but acceptance, understanding, peace with the fact that she'd done everything she could, that Emma's death had meaning because people like Sarah refused to let it be meaningless. Detective Chen, a young woman, approached, maybe 25, wearing the uniform of a new K-9 officer. "I'm Officer Amanda Rodriguez. I just wanted to say thank you. Emma's story, what you did to find the truth, it's the reason I joined the K-9 program. I want to be the kind of cop who listens when something seems wrong, who doesn't give up just because it's easier." Sarah shook her hand, seeing in this young officer the future that Emma's death had helped create. "Make sure your dog trusts you, and when they try to tell you something, listen. They see things we miss." "I will." Amanda knelt to greet Rex, who accepted her attention with regal patience. "Is it true he broke protocol at the funeral? That he refused every command?" "He did." Sarah smiled at the memory, which no longer hurt quite as sharply as it once had, because he knew Emma deserved justice more than he needed to follow orders. "He taught me that sometimes breaking the rules is the most moral thing you can do." Amanda left to join her training group, and Sarah remained in the garden as twilight deepened into night. As stars began to appear overhead, as the memorial lights illuminated the bronze statue and made it seem almost alive, Rex settled at her feet, content to keep watch, and Sarah felt the weight of the last year finally begin to lift. She'd lost her badge. She'd lost her career. She'd lost the certainty that following the rules led to justice. But she'd gained something to the knowledge that some truths were worth any price. That courage meant standing alone when everyone else sat down, that love for a stranger's child could matter as much as love for your own. Emma Rose Hartley had died on December 21st, murdered by the person who should have protected her most, but she lived on in this facility, in the dogs being trained to save lives. In the memorial garden where her statue stood watch, in the hearts of everyone who'd been touched by her story, and in Sarah Chen, former detective, current director of investigations for the Emma Hartley Memorial Foundation, who'd learned from a 7-year-old's journal that the fight was always worth it, even when victory seemed impossible. "Good night, Emma," Sarah whispered to the statue, to the memory, to the little girl who'd changed everything. "Rex and I will take it from here." The bronze dog stood eternal watch as Sarah and the living. Rex walked back toward the facility, toward the work that awaited them, toward a future built on tragedy but sustained by hope. Behind them, if you believed in such things, a 7-year-old girl smiled and whispered thank you into the September night her words carried, on the wind, to everyone who'd fought for her, who'd remembered her, who'd refused to let her truth be buried. And in the eternal way of dogs and children and those who loved them, Rex barked once in response, a sound that said what words could not. You re-welcome. You're remembered. You mattered. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, bearing witness to one small story in the infinite tapestry of human tragedy and triumph. Emma Hartley's story, Sarah Chen's story, Rex's story. A story about how sometimes the smallest voices, a dying child, a dedicated dog, a stubborn detective, could change everything.